Hi, I'm John Robichaud, and this is the 1000 Second Album Podcast, and I think you should listen to Sit Down by James.
Hi, I'm Jeff Stephen, and you're listening to the 1000 Second Album Podcast. This season, we'll be talking about must-hear songs as I continue to ask people that are important to me all about the music that's important to them. Enjoy! Please welcome John Robichaud.
Hi.
And the song of choice today is Sit Down by James. And John, can you start by telling me a bit about your history with the band? Where were you? When was it that you became a fan?
Oh, so many eons ago. So this song, actually, Sit Down, is the first song I ever heard by James. And it actually is kind of I don't know if it's a funny story or an interesting story, but it's my story. Back in the day, before internet or whatever, we discovered music, radio, much music. And one of my favorite things to do was stay up Friday nights and watch City Limits. So it was the precursor to the Wedge, which was the big alternative music video show in the 90s. And that was on in the afternoons. And then that moved again until the evenings. But before that, it was City Limits, and it was on from 11:30 to 1 in the morning. So you stayed up late, watched City Limits, and it was at first when I first started watching it was Kim Clark Chipness, I believe it was, and then it was Simon Evans after that, who then started with Wedge. Anyway, all that to say, the first time I ever heard the song was the video came on City Limits. And so the fun thing for us to do was to have our VCR tape ready, and we would record the songs that seemed interesting to us. And sometimes we'd tape over them, sometimes we'd miss the first 5 minutes. But that's the first time I'd heard James and the song Sit Down, and we recorded the video. Problem is I was vying for recording space with one of my brothers, and he got James. So I didn't get to watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it. I had to borrow it from him if I ever wanted to listen to it again. So I loved the song, but then I didn't really get into them until a few years later when Laid came out, and I bought it from BMG for the 10 CDs for a penny.
Yeah.
And I bought Laid, and I loved Laid. And then I ended up going back and buying James, the self-titled album, which is actually Goldmother re-recorded for American audiences with Sit Down and Come Home. And I believe there's something else in there added to it. Anyway, so that's my history with the song. But anyway, I've loved James since the early 90s. And
Well, it's
I,
funny
I,
the today's I always feel rather aged when I say things like, "Oh, today's youth they'll never understand," but it's true that like those that VHS storage was sacred, where there was the one quality level where you got 6 hours of tape, but then if you really wanted
oh,
a high
yes.
quality, you only had 2 hours of material to work with, and throw in the
Oh, I used the 6 hours. I wasn't caring too much about image quality. It was just getting the video, getting the song.
That's right.
Yeah.
Nice.
You'd
Oh,
have
that's
hours of back-to-back videos.
yes. No, absolutely. And so yeah, City Limits, of course, yeah, Much Music was a staple, I think, in most of our households in the in the early 90s for sure. And the for me, I joined the party a little bit later with the song Lage. And it was funny, it was again the same sort of not immediately picking up liking the song, but not necessarily diving any deeper right away. And it was later
Hmm.
on where do you remember the Frosh CD that came out in
Oh
the late 90s?
yes,
Yeah.
the
And so
Frost CD.
yeah.
Yes,
So when
great
that
album, great
oh it
album.
was
So many great songs on
yeah.
there, but yeah.
And when they resurfaced on that, it was like, oh yeah, James. And then eventually a friend had the best of, I think with the flowers on the front cover, and then that led to the immersion, and they just seem like such a reliable band that
Hmm.
yeah, just
Hmm.
solid throughout. But I guess
Oh yeah.
we should focus on the one song in particular with Sit Down. And with the song
Yes.
itself, are there sort of key moments or lyrics or little bits that you particularly enjoy?
Oh, so many. I mean, so that's one of the great things about Tim Booth is, I mean, he's a fantastic singer. And if you've ever seen him live or ever seen any of his music videos, he's a great dancer. He's a frenetic dancer. so that's, I mean, Manchester, right?
Yeah.
But his lyrics were all fantastic. Like the way it starts, the way it starts, basically, I think it's him at night, being up late at night and feeling sorry for himself and thinking he's alone, but then he's not alone. And so that's sort of this, I think, the story behind the song. But like great lines like, if I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. Like my wife and I quote that line all the time. It's like, I wouldn't know sadness if I didn't know happiness, that sort of thing. And then like at the end, sort of like the end where there's the drum beat and it's like, those who feel the touch of sadness sit in next to me. Those who feel they're touched by madness sit down next to me. Those who find themselves ridiculous sit down next to me. It speaks to me. Like I was just like, and you could just sing and shout along to it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's funny, there is something like in those lyrics there you said that the sit down next to you, like the music feels very inviting as well. There's something like lyrically he's just saying like join us and grab a seat. But I find that the drum beat, it's so simple,
Oh yeah.
but it's perfection. Just the just propelling it along is
And
great. And you mentioned
it's such a big sound too. And I
yeah.
mean, they're a huge band. Like I think back then there were 7 members,
Right.
but I think they're up to 9 now. I think they're just a huge band with a big sound, all kinds of instruments, and they just play big. Like
Yeah.
I think at one point they were compared to the Water Boys,
Oh.
like the original Water Boys sound with a big sound.
Mhm.
But then they've moved all over the place with the Manchester sound. And
Yeah.
anyway,
Oh, that's good. And they, but
back to sit
yeah,
down.
but it's true. They have that gift the Waterboys had, where I remember in the 1001 albums project I did, Fisherman's Blues was on there, and the first I remember listening to the opening track and the first 12 seconds, as soon as the band kicked in, it's like okay, I'm in, done, sold. Yeah, I'm convinced. And James, I think, had that same instant. They won me over right away with this. Just there
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
it was an open invite right from the start, which is good.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because here in North America, it's not a huge song. Like I
Mhm.
think like people really don't know James, but if you played them late, they would know that
Yes.
because of that Frost CD you
Yeah.
mentioned, because of the American Pie commercials that it was on for years and years and years. But James has got some, a lot of their songs have been licensed for commercials too. Like I think Born of Frustration used to be on some car commercial in the 90s. And Sit Down was actually used to promote the 7th season of Game of Thrones. I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan, but I think I never watched the later seasons, but I remember seeing the spots where they took Sit Down and they slowed it down, and it was sitting down on the throne. Was it the
Oh.
Iron Throne? What's it called?
That sounds right. Yeah. That's what I haven't. I'll have to check that out after we chat. That sounds funny. It's funny because I wouldn't have thought Game of Thrones and the battling wasn't quite as peaceful and inviting, but a neat choice there. I like it.
Yeah.
That's fun. And that's interesting that you said it was from the album's originally called something different in the UK. It was called Gold Mother in the UK.
So Sit Down was actually a non-album single. It was released prior to 1990's Gold Mother. It was recorded and released as a single in like 88 or 89. And the original version, if you can dig it up, it sounds very different from the version that we know and love. And it was 7.5 minutes long. Like it was long. And it had different lyrics. But then they re-recorded it in 1991, and that's the version we know. And so when they reissued Gold Mother for U.S. audiences, they added it on and they renamed it James. Like so, it's a self-titled release, and it's the one that's got it's the blue one with the white flower on the
Yeah.
cover. That's the one that everyone in the states will know. That's sort of like their introduction to the states,
Uh,
1991.
Nice. I was because I had seen there was another version that was 8 minutes, and I was wondering if it was like I know The Cure, they have the beautiful pictures of you. That like the
Mm-hmm.
version I knew and loved was 7.5 minutes, and then on Greatest Hits they did like a radio version where
Mm.
they turned it right down. And I remember my dad buying a Don McLean greatest hits CD with American Pie, but instead of having the whole story, they cut out a couple verses. Like, did they really need to cut it? But I guess if this one, the version we know and love, is the shorter, then that's good too, I suppose. So
Yeah.
that's good.
And they actually released last year. It's called "Opened Up by the Wonderful." If you're interested in James, they what they did they they released it as sort of like a celebration of their 40 years. So they've been around for 40 years. That's
Right.
makes you feel old, right? But they re-recorded a bunch of their hits through the whole career with an orchestra.
Oh,
So they sit down is on there as well, and it's actually quite a nice version. So it's a little bit not quite as upbeat throughout, but it's quite lovely with the
oh.
strings.
That sounds promising. I like it. But I'd imagine if we had to pick a single version of it, it would be the
Oh yeah.
91 version would be the must hear. And what is it, despite all the other great stuff in their catalog, what is it about Sit Down that makes it the must hear song?
Well, I mean, it's despite the fact that almost nobody knows it. Well, I'm sure people here know it in North America. It's huge in England and huge in the UK, and it's the song that they're really known for. And I remember hearing a story, the guys in the band telling about how they were playing a show in France, and a bunch of their fans from Manchester sort of crossed over to go to this small show in France. And when they started playing the song, people started sitting down in the crowd. And so by the end of the song, everyone in the audience was sitting down and just singing along with them. And it's just things like that. Like that's when you see them live, they incite that sort of behavior. And this song in particular, people will just like as soon as they hear the first few songs and the first few notes, it really does
Yeah.
kind of sets you in the mood for the rest of the song. It's just so with the drum beat you were saying and the guitars and the slide guitar. It's just it really does. It's a very happy and very joyful sounding song and puts you in the mood to just hug the person next to you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it does feel like a community building thing. And I love that
Yeah.
because usually like when fans sit down at a concert, that's not usually an indication things are going very well. But in this case, it's the opposite, that that's their warmest sign of approval that no, this is our song and we'll be seated for it. So
Yeah. So they do. When I saw them, I think both times I saw them, they played it, but I think they don't play it at every show because they don't want to get sick of it, sort of
sure.
thing. But it is their biggest song, I think, in England for sure.
Yeah. Nice. And the and speaking of England, you mentioned a bunch of fans made the trek to France. Would this also solidify Manchester's case as the number one musical city for musical
Wow.
exports?
So much music came
Yeah.
out of Manchester, but absolutely, like it's funny because if you listen to the song and listen to anything else by James, you may not sort of put them in the same boat as the Stone Roses or the Happy Mondays, but they were very much at that time. And I believe I was just looking, and I think the guys from Inspiral Carpets, I don't know if you know Inspiral Carpets, they actually performed backup vocals on one of the songs on here. And Inspiral Carpets were the band that Noel Gallagher famously roadied for.
Oh,
And,
okay.
he constantly told them he was better than them and he quit the band and started Oasis. Anyway, and,
And it worked out okay, I
Oasis.
guess.
Yeah, it was all right. It did all right. But yeah, so James, like this, that Goldmother and this song was sort of at that time with the height of Manchester, right?
Yeah. And
Just everything crazy going.
throw in the Smiths and New Order and
Oasis.
you name it. Yeah, it's a pretty impressive claim to fame, I think. So, that's good. And does Tim Booth still sound as good as ever as well on the
Oh
vocals?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. He just puts on a vocal performance, just like
yeah,
a show.
yeah,
And his he doesn't dance as crazy as he used
yeah.
to, but if you watch the video for Sit Down, he
Yes.
does. He gets into it. But that's the reason. So the album after Laid was called Whiplash,
Mhm.
and it's called that because he gave himself whiplash while on tour dancing.
Oh, from dancing too vigorously.
Yeah, dancing too
Okay.
vigorously.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
the injury led to good art, though, at least.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So out of adversity comes comes art. So I like that. That's good. Well, a huge thank you for coming today, John, and until the next time.
Until the next time.
This has been the 1000-Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.